Whose fault? Perfect.
Maybe somebody will have to come up here and repair this.
That's good.
Well, I could just let it dangle like that. Okay, we'll go with that. We'll go with that. Oh, can we have the house lights up a bit? I'd ask them up. I'd like to see who's out there. Good. Thanks very much. Maybe a little bit more. Okay. I can see some faces out there. That's good. Well, as Paul told you, thanks for a lovely introduction, Paul. But as Paul told you, I'm a philosopher. And we philosophers have to get used to the fact that some of the thinkers we take most seriously, and should take most seriously, were not themselves philosophers. Here's a sort of hall of fame of the five of the most important, influential philosophers who weren't philosophers. I think you probably know the top row without any trouble. That's, call them out.
Newton, Einstein, Freud.
Newton, Einstein, and Freud. In the next row, a little harder to tell. Kurt Gödel, yes, Kurt Gödel on the left and Alan Turing on the right. But in my way of thinking, the number one philosopher who wasn't a philosopher is certainly this fellow. And when I show this slide, I sometimes get some laughter, which puzzles me, because I myself don't see why anybody would think that there's any real resemblance between me and my hero. But that is, of course, Charles Darwin. Why was Darwin's idea so great? I think the answer is quite straightforward. His idea, more than any other scientific idea, united the world of purposeless causation with the world of meaning, all the way from physics, if you like, to ethics and poetry, all in one unified perspective. It wasn't just a great unifying perspective, it was a very challenging and upsetting perspective. After all, there had been a unified perspective in the pre-Darwinian world, and a very traditional one, made famous, of course, by Michelangelo on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. We can zoom in on the central panel, and there we see an intelligent designer, God, putting the finishing touches on his most intelligent design, presumably, and that's man. This is, of course, the trickle-down theory of creation. And I think it's very intuitive, it's very appealing. In fact, I think it's an idea that has probably had a grip on us since before Homo sapiens, even. That is, an early hominid, Homo habilis, made very simple tools, chipped little scrapers and things like that. And Homo habilis may have had some dim appreciation that it takes a big fancy thing to make a less fancy thing. You never see a pot making a potter. You never see a horseshoe making a blacksmith. It's always the other way around. Big, fancy, smart things making things not quite as wonderful as they are. That's the way things stood until Darwin came along, and we got the bubble-up theory of creation. Since this is Darwin's birthday, I think we really do have to quote some Darwin. So here's Darwin's idea. You can't read it there, and I won't bother reading all of it. It's often said that it's an argument, and indeed it is. And I'm just going to highlight the part of it that's an argument. This is the summary of the book, really, of the theory, which comes from the end of chapter 4 of Origin of Species. If, during the long course of ages and under varying conditions of life, organic beings vary at all, and if there be a severe struggle for life, then, if variations useful to any organic being do occur, Assuredly, individuals thus characterized will have the best chance of being preserved in the struggle for life. And from the strong principle of inheritance, they will tend to produce offspring similarly characterized. This principle of preservation I have called, for the sake of brevity, natural selection. That's it. That is Darwin's great and dangerous idea, in a nutshell. And an early critic of Darwin, not so early actually, it was 1868, summed up the idea in a wonderful passage, which I want to share with you. This critic was writing in high dudgeon. The capital letters were in the original. In the theory with which we have to deal, absolute ignorance is the artificer, so that we may enunciate as the fundamental principle of the whole system that in order to make a perfect and beautiful machine, it is not requisite to know how to make it. This proposition will be found, on careful examination, to express in condensed form the essential purport of the theory, and to express in a few words all Mr. Darwin's meaning, who, by a strange inversion of reasoning, seems to think absolute ignorance fully qualified to take the place of absolute wisdom in all the achievements of creative skill. Exactly. And that's it. He's got it. He's put it exactly right. That's the purport of the theory. And it is a strange inversion of reasoning. I think this is very well brought out by a creationist pamphlet that was sent to me by a student. This is one page of this little propaganda pamphlet. Test 2. Do you know of any building that didn't have a builder? Do you know of any painting that didn't have a painter? Do you know of any car that didn't have a maker? If you answered yes for any of the given tales, if that doesn't show how crazy the theory of natural selection is, what would? And yet that's exactly what the Darwinian theory challenges. Mackenzie was right. It is a strange inversion of reasoning. I showed you a picture of Alan Turing, another brilliant Brit, and I want to suggest that we can well understand Darwin's strange inversion of reasoning by understanding Turing's strange inversion of reasoning, because he's responsible for another great inversion. And in fact, I think you'll see, I'm going to try to show you, it's really the same inversion in a slightly different guise. Here it is. Here are some pre-Turing computers. A lot of them wore dresses. They were people. Mostly they were math majors, out-of-work math teachers, perhaps. And that was their job, that was their title, they were called computers. In the old days, computers had to understand arithmetic. Not just arithmetic, they had to understand mathematics. They had to appreciate the reasons for what they were doing. They were highly educated people. Turing recognized that this was not necessary. In fact, in a classic paper, in the classic paper, The Birth, this is the paper which inaugurates the computer age in the same way that the Origin of Species inaugurates the evolutionary age. Look what he says. He says, the behavior, he's sort of a behaviorist, of the computer, meaning the person, at any moment is determined by the symbols which he is observing and by his state of mind at the moment. With the quote on state of mind, meaning he's not going to take this mind tough stuff all that seriously. And what he realized is something very much like what Darwin realized. Now here's Darwin in the words of Mackenzie. In order to make a perfect and beautiful machine, it is not requisite to know how to make it. Here's Turing. In order to be a perfect and beautiful computing machine, it is not requisite to know what arithmetic is. Two